This podcast acknowledges the traditional owners and custodians of the lands and waters throughout Australia where we record this podcast. We pay our respects to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and the Ngunnawal people and Wiradjuri people of the Kulin Nation and their elders past and present. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Day One, the Maddocks podcast talking all things clerkship and commercial law related. You're joined by Maddocks lawyers Sophie, Edgar and Sam Ejtemai, and boy oh boy have we got a good episode for you today.
We absolutely do, Soph. We hope you all enjoyed episode 1 and got something out of the interview with Michael and AJ. We've got an absolute special episode today. We've got CEO Dave Newman who's going to come on and share his vision on where Maddocks is going in the future. He's going to talk a little bit about his journey into becoming a partner at Maddocks. He's going to talk about his jobs that he's had before becoming a lawyer at Maddocks, which is a very short list. There's a spoiler for you. But yeah, no, I definitely learned a lot from this interview with Dave, so I'm sure you guys will get something out of it as well.
Yeah, it's probably very early in the series to be making a call this big, but I think it may be my favourite interview that we've done so far. Hopefully Dave's not listening to this, or that will be very embarrassing.
Yeah, or Michael or Adam.
Yeah. But it is such a good episode for you to get some insights into Maddocks and life at Maddocks, and who better to hear it from than none other than the CEO himself.
Yeah, exactly right. Before we dive into all that, though, I think we're going to talk a little bit about something that's asked quite a bit. I know Sophie and I have been to a couple networking events. You got quite a few questions in the last week at the last networking event you went to.
Yeah, exactly. There's been, like you said, both of us have been to the networking nights recently, and probably one of the most common questions that we get asked is, in our experience, why Maddocks? How did we choose that we wanted to work at Maddocks? And how did we go through and navigate that process when we were applying? Because it's quite tricky.
It's super tricky. And I think when you're applying, particularly for the students listening, when you're applying for clerkships and you want to try to think, what am I putting in my cover letters? One of the things that is really, really important, or a couple of things that are really important, is why do you want to be a lawyer?
Yeah.
You really need to be able to spell that out in your cover letter.
It's good to know.
It's good to know when you're applying for a law firm. I think more specifically is, why do you want to be a commercial lawyer?
Yeah.
There's lots of people that are interested in vast areas of law. I mean, the law can mean so many things. You can be interested in family law, criminal law, human rights law.
Completely.
But, if you're applying for a seasonal clerkship, you're interested in commercial law, you need to be able to talk to that.
Yeah.
But most specifically, and I think the hardest part about that, because everything before that's a little bit more personal about your journey.
Yeah.
That last bit is, why do you want to be a commercial lawyer at the specific firm you're applying for? In this instance, why do you want to be a commercial lawyer at Maddocks? And that can be a really tricky thing to decide for a student when you haven't worked here, or you don't get to walk the halls, you don't get to live the day to day, and you kind of have to do your research. And how do you be unique in that answer, and how do you tell that story?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, where do you even start? Like, it's so tricky. And if you don't know anyone within the firm, or you haven't experienced the firm for yourself, it's really hard to get an understanding as to what that particular firm might be like. And I mean, it's kind of expected at some point throughout the process that you're going to go onto the various firms' websites and have a look through the material. But I feel like there's this huge expectation that when you're looking through a website, that you're going to have this big epiphany that that particular firm is the right firm for you, which is such a high bar and high pressure, I suppose, to put on students, because it fails to recognize that a lot of the law firms have very similar websites. I mean, we're all working within the commercial law industry. We all have very similar material. And what really differentiates a firm from a different firm is really tricky to capture in a website. So I feel like it's kind of an unrealistic expectation to place on students to be able to come up with that from the website material alone.
Yeah, no. And I think, having hindsight now, having gone through the grad program and having gone through clerkships, it's a lot easier for me. If I was to rewrite my cover letter knowing what I know now, you'd be able to really talk about the nuanced differences between the firms and why Maddocks appeals to me, and be able to link it. But as a student, and you hear it all the time when you go and listen to sort of like, I heard it a lot at HR panels when I was a uni student, being like, we really want you to know why you're applying for Maddocks, and really do your research and really sound unique. And it's really hard to sound unique if you're copying and pasting the website.
Oh, exactly. And also I think that the answer that some of the HR reps or partners might be expecting you to come up with is an answer that they have been able to gain from having the experience within that firm. It's not something that you can always appreciate from an outsider's perspective who has absolutely no experience working within potentially commercial law, and especially within Maddocks.
Yeah, absolutely. But for those that are listening, the good news is this is absolutely the first step, or one of the steps that will make a huge difference when you're trying to decide for why Maddocks and getting some real insights into it. And particular, Dave, in his interview a little later on in this episode, he really talks about the vision that Maddocks has and
Yeah.
why, I mean, Maddocks has recently rebranded into being the modern Australian law firm, and he shed some light into what that means, the vision of the firm. And it's actually quite, I know me and you left that interview thinking this is a really cool place to work, and really excited for what the future
Yeah, for
holds.
sure.
In a time particularly where, there's a lot of uncertainty in the world, he kind of makes it sound like a really exciting time to be a lawyer and to be a lawyer at Maddocks. So, that's one part of it. So I think you listeners will get a lot out of that portion of the interview. But something that is really unique to Maddocks that, and I don't want to steal Dave's thunder on this, but he talks about stewardship, which is one of the core values at Maddocks. And it's not a word that may be used in everyday life, although for us now it is. But it is a value that is unique to Maddocks, and I haven't seen it anywhere else. And I think working here, it's one of those ones that's really embodied on the day-to-day life.
Yeah, I think
Um,
so.
and I think that's, and he speaks about it beautifully, but I have, like, if I were to rewrite my cover letter, having worked here, that's what I would hone in on. And everyone talks about Maddocks having a great workplace culture, and it does, but it's such a great way to be able to talk about why Maddocks has a great workplace culture, because I think it's something that we embody, like, at
Yeah.
all levels.
I would definitely agree with that. Taking it back a step, given that stewardship isn't something that we do come across in everyday life, what do we mean when we say that the firm embodies stewardship? And like,
What is stewardship?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, totally. Again, I'm going to steal Dave's thunder a little bit, but he'll explain this better. But for just to give the listeners a little bit of a taste of what it is, stewardship, at Maddocks, the value that we have, it's the idea that Maddocks has been around for many, many years and will continue to be around for many, many years. And the partners and the people here, we act as custodians of the firm. It's about leaving the firm in a better place than where we found it. And I think that really resonates with me, and I think it resonates a little bit with our generation, Sophie, of
For
like,
sure.
it's not about just doing what's going to benefit us right now in this moment in time, but it's also about taking into account all the other factors of, and I use it as a broader picture in society and our generation of like leaving the world in a better place. And we talk about like, the real transition to renewable energy and taking into account the environment. But I think that at Maddocks, that embodiment of the culture of like, if I'm doing something, I want to leave it in a better place, knowing that the firm is going to be here after I'm gone, like a real legacy thing. But it just means that like at all levels, all interactions have that focus in mind. It just creates such a cool place and such a fun place to work.
Yeah, it is pretty cool. And I think it's similar to, I feel like we're definitely stealing Dave's thunder, but anyway, we'll continue.
I think he outshines us, but that's fine.
When he talks about being a modern Australian law firm and what that means, and I think that the value of stewardship and being a modern Australian law firm link quite nicely together, because it's that reminder of you don't have an end goal or a destination in mind, but it's something that you need to continuously check back in with yourself the whole way through the process to make sure that everything you do on your daily basis reflects those values, so that you don't look back in 5, 10, 20 years and go, how on earth did we get here? Because you're constantly moving and keeping up with those values.
Spot on. If you were to go back in time, Soph, and if you were a student now applying for Clerkships, with applications opening up soon, what would you like? What are some of the things that what would you say as to why Maddocks and why you've enjoyed your graduate program and being a lawyer at Maddocks?
I think the first thing that I want to touch on here is, and I said it to a few people at a networking night this week, and I think the first thing that I wanted to touch on was that everything I was told about Maddocks prior to coming in, so I placed a very high value on other people's experiences. I had some friends within the industry who recommended Maddocks really highly, regarded it very well. Just in terms of, I suppose when I say regarded it well, it was well in terms of the work that you'd be doing, but also the people you'd be working with. And I was really sure when I was coming in and starting my journey, because I didn't know exactly what type of commercial lawyer I wanted to be, I placed a really big emphasis on making sure that I would be working with people that were going to foster that and be able to work with me while I figured that out throughout a graduate program. And I really didn't want to be pigeonholed from day one. So I think it's really positive that everything I was told before I entered the firm in terms of having a great culture and all these buzzwords that you constantly hear, it has been an accurate and true reflection of my time at Maddocks so far. So I think that if you're listening to this, you can place some or take some comfort in knowing that what we're telling you, it's not just because they're buzzwords and because
Yeah,
it's
they really live it.
yeah, like
Yeah.
it's probably very unique in the sense that, you know, we've experienced other firms and Maddocks is a very true depiction of what you see is what you get. And that's what I love.
Yeah, I think it's a good size. Like Maddocks is a national firm. We've got 3 offices. We talked about that in our previous episode. We're quite big in the sense of like we've got a good head count. Like I know in the Melbourne office we're about 450 people, which sounds big, but it's a really good size where you're able to work on, like we have the scope to take on some of the most exciting projects and work that is in the Australian market, but we're not that big that you're just a cog in the wheel sort of turning around. You actually get to get really good exposure to partners and senior lawyers, and you get that autonomy if you want it to go and explore, as you said, various areas and various different types of work before you start to specialize. For example, I know in the construction team that I've settled in, you do both front end and back end work. So if you know you like front end and that's the area you want to go into, that's fantastic. Those opportunities are there. But if you don't know, you can do a nice 50-50 split of both front end and back end and get a real feel for a couple of years before you start to say, look, you know, I've spent a really good time figuring out both sides. And I know that, you know, I much prefer the back end or I much prefer the front end. And those are such valuable years where you're building your skill sets, but you also get that comfort of, you know, I've tried everything and I know for sure that I like this area.
Yeah. So I suppose in terms of helpful tips and, you know, in my experience, the 3 biggest things, if I was to go back now and rewrite my cover letter as to why Maddocks, number 1, which I will continue to talk about, and it's probably one of my favorite things about Maddocks, is the people. I just love working with my colleagues. I love the dynamic between everyone here at Maddocks, and I love that it's a really great place where you can be a junior and really like embody life as a junior and not know what you're doing, but be comforted throughout the entire experience and have really great mentors. So big tick for me is the people that I work with and the culture. I think that if you're going to networking events and you're meeting people from the firm, those people tend to be an accurate reflection of what it is like at Maddocks. So if you like talking to Sam or I at networking nights, then I think that you'll have a pretty good time here at Maddocks. The second thing that I really like about working here is, like I've mentioned multiple times, I wasn't someone that knew exactly what I wanted to do before coming in to the firm, and I knew I wanted to be a commercial lawyer, but exactly what that looked like I was still working out. And so I really enjoyed that, being the size of the firm that we are, like you touched on, and being in the mid-tier, we are quite unique in the fact that juniors are exposed to a really diverse range of work really early on. And so I found with that style, I was really able to, over my grad year, work out what it is that I was interested in and sort of come to this place where I am really sure that this is the area that I want to be working within and love to do so on a daily basis. And then the third thing, which will be helpful for you all listening, and something that we didn't have the benefit of going into with this knowledge, but the graduate year at Maddocks and the graduate program, I should say, is so good.
It's so good.
Like, I think that, you know, everything I've just said about me working out where it is that I wanted to work and within which team that was, all comes down to the learning and the guidance that you're given throughout that graduate program. You know, you're set up with buddies and mentors and supervisors within every team, and you're also at some stages given graduate partners or supervising partners where you have a lot of one-to-one interaction with the partners.
Yeah.
And they give such valuable insights into, you know, whether that be your billing practices or whether that is how you conduct client interviews or just your day-to-day mannerisms of how to keep a good functioning to-do list. That actual like 101 of how to be a good lawyer is something that I think can be brushed over. And I haven't experienced other graduate programs, but in terms of what Maddocks offer and the program that we're given here, I don't think there was anything that I would change or anything that I look back on now and say, I wish I learnt more of this.
No. I echo that 100%. The amount of exposure you get to learning and development in your grad program is incredible.
I think that is all back to the size of the firm that we are and the type of firm that we are. You look at our retention rates of lawyers from across the firm, and a lot of the partners can sympathise with the position that we're in because they have been in that position at this firm.
I know it's crazy when you hear that like some of the partners started as they call it article clerks.
Yeah.
You know, they've been around for a while when they say article clerks. Or it is like, and they stay involved and they're super keen on your development, regardless of whether you're going to come back to their team.
Exactly.
Like if you're in their team for 2 months or 4 months, depending on which rotation you're doing, they're so invested in making sure you have the best rotation in that practice area. And because the teams work so closely together so often, you know, you heard Michael and AJ talk about the crossover between development and tax.
Yeah.
You're working with, like, whether or not you stay in their team or you go to another team, chances are you're going to work with that team at some point again in the coming months. So,
and even if you don't, you know, it's so nice to have those interactions. We have the Barcode Cafe here in Melbourne, and you come across the partners like daily, weekly at Barcode or in our common areas. And whether you're in their team or not, it's so nice to have that camaraderie with various people across the firm. So I really like that. But that was a very long, waffly answer.
No, but really tangible. And I think you touched on really the key points as to why Maddocks and why Maddocks is special. I think the only thing I would add, you know, I had a list of 3 things, which 2 of them were the exact same.
Yes.
I think the only thing I'd say is that the firm really values your life outside of the law as well. The law can be all encompassing at times. I'm sure the uni students feel that, you know, it can be, there can be a lot of issues, a lot of difficulties in terms of the work. It's complex, and it's really good to check out whether you're a uni student, whether you're a lawyer, whether you're a partner. It's a really, really important thing, and the firm really values that.
I think they value that. Having interests outside of work make you a better lawyer because you come to work refreshed. You're not burnt out. And I don't know, maybe it might be a long bow to tie, but maybe you can link that into retention rates, like why people genuinely like working here for such a long period of time.
Spot on. And I remember in my grad year, I was catching up with a partner, and I love my extracurriculars. I play a lot of sport outside of work, and every Monday night I go and play pennant. I play league, and that was really important for me to maintain that. And I remember saying early, like nervous that I wouldn't be able to leave on a Monday, you know, a little bit earlier than the usual leave time to make sure I keep up with those commitments. And the partner was like, absolutely, you need to have, not only for your own sort of like work-life balance, but also just like and he said, we don't want lol robots here. We want people that have a life outside of work and have, you know, interesting things to talk to. And it makes you more balanced. It makes you more well-rounded.
For sure. I think Sam plays it down a little bit, but for those who are listening may not know, he is a very exceptional squash player and has quite the resume behind him, which includes playing in the national squash team. So for Sam, I'm sure it's very important that he continues to play his squash. And I know, you know, like we've spoken after a weekend and you've come back having been at the club or, you know, playing in pennant, and you've actually got really interesting stories about the people that you've met from pennant and squash. Like,
you meet really interesting people.
In like a commercial industry, right? So it's really like, I think that it's good that the firm can also appreciate that you become a well-rounded person by having these experiences.
No, totally. And thank you for throwing me right under the bus there. Yes, no, it is. And for me, that's something that was really important as to where I wanted to work is what's going to support me to be the best lawyer I can be, but also to be the best person I can be, and to live a life that I'm, you know, the happiest. And that doesn't mean work 100% of the time. It means an environment that's going to cultivate and support a well-rounded lifestyle. And that's something that's really important. So yeah, again, a long-winded answer from me as well. But those are, you know, if I was to go back and to write my cover letter, and you know, you all have the really fun task of deciphering that information into 2 or 3 sentences, but those are some of the key reasons why Maddocks for me. And for each person, it's going to be something else. And you might take value in something Sophie said out of 1 of the points or 3 of the points. Or 2, it might be something that fits within your values, I guess. So take it all with a grain of salt, and everyone's got their own individual story. So try and link it back to why you want to be a commercial lawyer.
Yeah, absolutely. Because we, as much as we're saying all of this now, and it might be helpful and it might resonate with you, it might not, because we have the benefit of hindsight and having these reflections. whilst we already work within the firm, which we appreciate that you don't have that yet. So my one piece of advice would be to just talk to as many people within the firm as you can, whether that be at Maddocks or other firms. I think that is the best way that you'll get an understanding of what life at Maddocks is like. Would you tend to agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
So reach out to people, whether that be on LinkedIn, at various networking nights. Ask the questions, because no one expects you to know the answers. I mean, we don't even know the answers.
No, right.
So that's definitely a piece of advice that I would give to you. And as much as we could go on and on and on all day talking about this, we won't, because we know that you want to listen to Dave, and why would you not? It's a fantastic episode that we've got coming up for you. Dave is, like we mentioned at the start, Dave Newman is the CEO of Maddocks. So who better to answer why you should work at Maddocks than Dave? He's been a partner at the firm for 23 years and was appointed as the CEO in April of 2020. So he has some very interesting insights in terms of being appointed as the CEO during the thick of COVID and lockdown, and has a really interesting story to tell. So let's jump straight into the interview with Dave.
Well, we're joined here right now by a man that needs no introduction at Maddocks, but the CEO, David Newman. Thanks for joining us, Dave.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks, Sophie.
Just to get us started, can you tell us a little bit about your journey into law and how you found yourself at Maddocks?
Sure. So I started at Maddocks 23 years ago, almost. But before that, I was another smaller firm and actually did articles at that smaller firm 30 years ago this year, which is the graduate year as it was then. So I grew up in North Victoria on a dairy farm, and when I finished school, I came down to did a combined arts law degree at Monash University, which was, eye-opening for a kid from the country. And then it was very different back then. You didn't have the same opportunities to do clerkships that you do now. And when I came to looking to apply for firms to do articles at, I went through the yellow pages as it was then, and just assumed that those firms with the biggest ads, would take article clerks, and sent off a bunch of letters, and was offered articles at a firm called J.M. Smith and Emerton, which in the early 90s specialised in insolvency law because we were coming out of the recession from the late 80s. I was really fortunate to work with some really great partners at that firm, including the current Chief Justice, Anne Ferguson, who was a partner at the firm at the time, and loved insolvency. And so I loved the fact that I got to go to court, it was commercial, it was practical, you had to know Corporations Act, but only a little bit of it, not all of it. And you had to know a little bit about everything, because when you're acting for an insolvency practitioner or for a company, you need to be able to triage issues and understand what issues might arise. So Smith & Emerton merged with a few firms, and by the time I left the firm in 2000, it was Gaydon's, and so I left a firm called Gaydon's. So this is technically my second job, or my second firm at least, although I have seen a lot of changes, both at the firm that I was originally at, which went through significant changes while I was there, and Maddocks has changed a lot in the time that I've been here. When I started, there was only one office. It was Maddocks, Lundy and Chisholm. The Sydney office opened a few years after I joined, and then the Canberra office about 13 years after I joined. So I've seen a lot of change here as well. And throughout that entire period, I've been an insolvency lawyer. I've had the benefit of working for banks and major accounting firms, and a lot of our corporate clients and even government clients who have been exposed to insolvency, which has been wide and varied. No day is the same.
There's no doubt that you've had a very successful career working as a commercial lawyer, and especially within the insolvency space. So what can you maybe tell us a little bit about what drew you to becoming the CEO here at Maddocks, and why you wanted to make that jump?
Sure. So I've been really lucky, and one of the things that attracted me to Maddocks was, that it was a very entrepreneurial and a very dynamic and restless firm. And ever since I joined, I joined as a senior associate. I became a partner not long after I joined, but I joined as a senior associate. And the fact that I was able to be involved in decisions that affected the firm and be involved in sort of strategic decisions around, how the firm would be shaped for the future, I really, really valued. And so I was, for a period there wasn't a committee that I wasn't on, even as a senior associate and junior partner. And so I was head of the commercial group for probably almost 10 years, and I was involved in on the board more than once, been involved in various committees, particularly the committees in relation to the premises moves, and particularly the premises here in Melbourne. And I guess what I was finding was that, you feel as though you're never doing one job as well as you could. It always feels though you could be doing more in relation to the management or the strategic vision of the firm, and you always feel as though you could be doing more for, from a client perspective as well. And then when the opportunity came up for this role, because Michelle, who'd done such a great job, couldn't be reappointed under our management rules, we have fixed terms. So we're always encouraging renewal and succession. So when a new CEO had to be appointed, I was asked to consider the role. I thought it was a great opportunity to actually just focus on part of being a lawyer that I actually like, which is the management of the law firm, and being able to use some of the skills I've learned as a lawyer. Hopefully not my insolvency skills. I think the firm's going okay, but in relation to how businesses work, what drives success it was a really exciting opportunity for me. Now, of course, I didn't really expect to take on the role in the middle of a global pandemic, and that brought with it obviously its own challenges. But in some ways, there was really great benefits from taking the role at that time as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think something that speaks volumes about your leadership style is I did my first rotation as a grad through the insolvency team, and something that the team talks about all the time is how you used to sit out on the floor with them instead of in an office by yourself. And I think that is just such a good depiction of the leadership style that you adopt, and very impressive, Dave.
Thank you. Well, I did. So I did sit in the open. I was the only partner sitting in the open plan. I sat there for a very long time. And I enjoyed it. It was interesting to see and hear, because junior lawyers would forget I was there, and so they'd be talking about a legal matter, and they'd be trying to workshop it, and I'd be sitting there sometimes just biting my tongue, just saying, okay, I'm just going to let them work their way through it. And then sometimes I just sort of stick my head up over the desk and say, look, I think you're on the wrong tram here. I think you need to look over here. They go, oh, we thought you were there. But it was great. No, I really enjoyed sort of being involved with people on the floor in that way.
Yeah. Taking a little bit of a pivot, when we went through the clerkship process, we found that one of the most important questions, and something that you need to reflect inwards on, is what firm do you want to work at, and why do you want to work at that firm? And it's a question that constantly is asked during the interview process, the application process, is this, why do you want to work at Maddocks? So can you maybe tell us, in your opinion, what sets Maddocks apart from other firms and what might draw juniors in?
So I think there's a few things. I think one thing that younger, the graduates or younger lawyers need to know is what they don't know. And one thing that I'm very, very conscious of not asking young lawyers, or graduates or clerks about is, what sort of lawyer do you want to be? Because it's a very unfair question, because they don't know, because they haven't experienced a law firm, they haven't experienced what it's like to work for clients. And I usually ask graduates or law students is, how would you like to work? Because if property is your favourite subject, it doesn't necessarily mean you like conveyancing. And so if you like, reading all the cases around equitable entitlements, then insolvency, plug for the insolvency team, is kind of up your alley. But it's not just the type of law you like, but how you want to work. Do you want to work with individuals, with corporates, with government, be instructed by other lawyers, work for family businesses, spend time in court, spend time in the back room, studying and writing detailed advices. So accepting that people, when they join the firm, don't really know the practice of law. I think one of the great things about Maddocks is we have such a broad range of practices and a broad range of experiences, which means that the young lawyers can find an area that suits them and that plays to their strengths, which I think is a really great strength of the firm. The other great strength of the firm, and why I'm still here, and I think why people stay here for as long as they do, is that we are a nice place to work. I think we talk about our culture all the time, and it's hard to put into words, and sometimes it's difficult to sort of put your finger on the special sauce. But ultimately, people are pretty down to earth, practical, normal, if I can use that on the podcast. We have an open door policy and all of those things, but it's genuine. It feels as though it's not contrived. It's not part of our branding. It's just who we are. It's one thing I like to check with particularly lateral recruits who join us, and I always ask them, do you know how we said we were really great and had nice culture and all that in the interview process? Did we make good on those promises? And everyone says that we do, and we have. So I think that really sets us apart as well. And being able to find your feet, bring your whole self to work, and all those things, I think are really important. And that's why I think that we're still a great place to work.
It's such great advice about you don't know what you don't know as a junior. I think particularly through university, I had no idea what I wanted to specialize. I knew I really enjoyed commercial law, but had just no clue what area I wanted to go into. And something I really enjoyed about a clerkship at Maddocks is that you get to rotate through 2 different subgroups during your clerkship. You get a good taste for different types of work, whether it's transactional or advisory or front end work. But also in your graduate program, there's the 3 rotations, and then within the bigger teams, you can do sub rotations. So you really get a good feel to make a good decision at the end of the day.
I had no clue either. When I started my articles year, and the partners asked me what I wanted to do, and this is basically my first day. We didn't have rotations. I said, I wouldn't mind going to court, but I don't want to do crime. That was my answer. And they've said, okay, we're going to put you in insolvency. So I'm not sure why they drew that connection, but anyway, that's where I ended up.
Yeah. It's great advice. I might pivot back a little bit. You mentioned that you didn't sign up to be the CEO of a national firm going through a global pandemic, and obviously being based in Melbourne, the market changed a lot in how we work and working from home and the flexibility that comes with that. I say this with bated breath that we've now probably coming out of the pandemic and are starting to get back to a new COVID normal. And in that time, Maddocks has now rebranded to the Modern Australian Law Firm. And there's a lot to unpack with that. So I might just start with what that new vision means for Maddocks and what you see the future of Maddocks as the Modern Australian Law Firm.
Yep, sure. So I think I mentioned before that there were some benefits in taking on this role during the pandemic. And the main benefit was it gave me time to get across the role. I think if I'd taken on the role in normal times, I would have been asked by my partners and by the firm, Dave, what's your vision? What's your legacy going to be? What are we going to do? What's your plan? Whereas, and to be honest, I didn't have one. And so, that's probably, I'm being unfair to myself. I didn't have a plan. I kind of knew what we needed to work on, but I didn't really, it's not something I could stand up on day one and articulate, because although I've been here for over 20 years and I know the firm really well from the various roles I've had, you don't realise how much you don't know about the firm until you get in this role. So the benefit of taking on the role during the pandemic was that for the first 12 months was really around making sure that we were transitioning to remote working, that we were looking after our staff, looking after everyone's well-being, making sure that we were servicing our clients, making sure that our national teams, which we really moved to being able to put together national teams to service clients, were working effectively. So there was sort of immediacy around some of those issues we had to deal with. And so that gave me at the same time to actually get a better understanding of the firm and understand, where we could actually move to. So sort of the first year, if we can sort of compartmentalise them. The second year of being in this role, we really started the process of talking about at a partnership level strategically, how we saw ourselves in the legal market. And a lot of that was around, where we want to get to. And through that process, what there's a bit of a theme here about not knowing what you don't know, but no one knows that the legal profession and the business community more generally has moved very quickly over the last few years particularly, but it's continuing to evolve. And, when we see things like ChatGPT coming out now, which we wouldn't have foreseen 6 months ago. So there's a whole range of things that are coming very quickly. So for us, and for me particularly, to say we are going to be this firm in 5 years' time, the only thing I know about that is that I would be wrong, because no one can predict the future ever, obviously, but particularly in the current dynamic environment. So for us, the vision that the partnership has embraced is that we want to be the modern Australian law firm. And that's deliberate, because the modern Australian law firm is that we want to be the benchmark against which other firms test themselves. But it's more of a journey than a destination, because I don't know what the modern Australian law firm looks like in 5 years' time, but we just have to keep asking ourselves the question, is this the modern way of doing something? And it might be the modern way of solving a legal problem, it might be the modern way of interacting with our clients, it might be the modern way of greeting our staff, our clients in reception. Like that. So every aspect of our business we can test against that question. And it's not just, is there a technology solution? Sometimes there'll be a technology solution and that's a modern way of doing something, but there might just be a better way of doing it. And so for us, continually testing ourselves about, are we doing this in the modern way, the best way, whatever variation of that question you want to ask, that will get us to a position where we are the firm we want to be. When we stop and look back, we'll say, well, we didn't really know where we're going to get to, but look where we've come from. And that's the strategy for the firm.
Absolutely. And you talk a little bit about setting a legacy. And I think something that's so unique about Maddocks, lots of firms use firm values, and it's usually a lot of the same word repeated, but something that stands out to Maddocks, it stood out to me, and I've heard you speak a lot about, is stewardship. And I think the vision ties in really, really well, talking about the journey and the legacy that it'll leave. Can you maybe talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So I think it is unique to us. I mean, you will see the various other values that we use as touchstones, not just words for us on the website. We do actually use them as we go through policy reviews or strategic reviews and how we manage the firm. But and things like integrity and innovation, will be pretty common across most organisations, I think. But stewardship, I think, is pretty unique to our firm. And what that really means to the partners is that we leave the firm in a better place than when we found it, and to ensure that the generations who come after us get to enjoy the firm and benefit from the firm that current partners have. And so for us, it's not about what's in it for me today. It's about what do I leave behind for others, which I think does drive behaviours that benefit the entire firm, which is one of our great strengths.
Absolutely. It's something that, as a value, that's really resonated with me, and listening to you speak over the years about it, it's something that stands true specifically when you work here. Like, you feel that that focus and that drive of making it a better place, particularly at a junior level, which leads me to my next question of, as a junior in this dynamic market, what do you think are some of the challenges or potentially some of the opportunities of entering the legal market at this time?
So I think the challenges aren't so much for junior lawyers entering the profession at this time. I think the challenges are for the profession. So I think what we've seen over the last few years, but certainly exacerbated by the pandemic, has been that the way that we train and develop our lawyers has changed. And so prior to the pandemic, there was some of the work that I learnt on, so minor litigation matters, small transactional work, due diligence, discovery, those sorts of tasks. In large part, the larger commercial law firms like Maddocks don't do anymore, because we're priced, it doesn't exist, it's done in-house, so we've priced ourselves out of that market a little bit. So those sorts of autonomous type matters that young lawyers used to do have gone a little bit. And so we replaced it with more formal learning, but it's not quite the same. Then what we've seen over the pandemic is we've seen a lot of interactions becoming a little bit more transactional, and we've moved to a lot more online court hearings, a lot more meetings, by Teams calls, etc. And what that means again is, although you might be having the opportunity to see the hearing or be involved in a client meeting that you might not otherwise have gone to because you can just dial in from wherever you are, you're missing the opportunity to sort of debrief and download. And some of the best learnings I had was going up to the practice court, watching the 10 matters before my matter came on, watching people make mistakes and making sure that I didn't make the same mistake, or going to a court and going and having a coffee with senior counsel afterwards and hearing what senior counsel said about the matter, about the judge, about the prospects, and then really taking that on and really engaging with the profession in that way. And from a commercial perspective, you jump on a tram, you go down the other end of Collins Street, you jump on the tram with the partner on the way back, you understand the context of the discussion, you understand what the next steps are. And so a lot of that is gone. And so the challenge for the profession is, how do we bring on the next partners as part of our commitment to stewardship when some of that experience is going to have to be done in a different way? And so that's a challenge for the profession more broadly. And I think the other challenge for the profession is to harness the knowledge and the skills of the lawyers coming through, because how we, as a lawyer for 30 odd years, how we interacted with our clients has changed a lot. And it was far more formal when I started. It's still a little bit formal now, but I've got young adult children, and how they interact with their peers is very different to how I do with my peers and friends, and how I do with clients, etc. And so being able to harness those sort of community changes, while maintaining the rigor that you need as a legal profession is really important. So it's really, I think, one of the challenges for the profession is to how do we embrace the changes that under 30s already have embraced and bring that into the business a bit more. So I think it's really exciting, a lot of those changes. It's a really exciting time, I think, to be joining the legal profession.
I definitely agree, and we've experienced that within our various experiences and entering the market when we did, and while the learnings may be different, it's still the learning and development that we get, especially in our experience here at Maddocks is so great, and the one-to-one that you do get with senior staff and especially with the partners is one of my favourite things about working here at Maddocks. As much as we'd like to pick your brains all day, we will just ask you one final question. If you could leave our listeners with any final words of wisdom, tips, tricks, advice about starting their career, commencing their career as commercial lawyers.
So I think the best advice I can give someone who's starting their career is to be curious and continually ask yourself or ask questions around what you're doing, why you're doing it. Back yourself. Everyone who comes to the profession have worked very, very hard to get there, and that there's, a kid from the country can go okay once you start in a law firm. Everyone's the same effectively. So back yourself, be curious, and I guess the most important thing, and I've been really lucky through my career, is to enjoy it. I mean, it's sometimes work isn't fun, sometimes it's hard, sometimes you're dealing with difficult issues, but you do get a lot of enjoyment out of helping clients, getting through problems. Funny stuff happens, which you look back on in your career and you enjoy. So it's a great profession to be part of. It's going to continue to be a fantastic profession and play an important role in our society. I wish everyone who's listening all the best.
Well, thank you so much for sitting down with us today. We really appreciate it and think that our listeners will get a lot out of this chat. I feel excited. I'm sure they will as well. It's been really great. So thank you.
Thanks, Sophie. Thanks, Sam.
Thanks, Dave. Thank you for tuning in to the Day 1 series brought to you by Maddocks on the Mic. If you like today's episode, make sure to subscribe to wherever you listen so you don't miss an episode of the show. For more information on any of the topics discussed in this episode, visit our website, maddocks.com.au.
This podcast is for reference purposes only. It does not constitute legal advice and should not be relied on as such. You should always obtain legal advice about your specific circumstances.